From the swamps of Acadiana to the Mississippi Gulf Coast and everywhere in between. From the city where the spirits that haunt the streets at night outnumber those served in its bars and restaurants. Welcome to Paranormal Talk.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Talk. I'm your co-host, David.
And I'm your co-host, Mark.
You know, tonight we have a very special show. It's a show I've been wanting to do for a very, very long time. It's going to be a show about a house that's located in the French Quarter on the corner of Royal and Governor Nichols. It's rumored to be one of the most haunted houses, if not the most haunted house in the French Quarter. It was once owned by Nicolas Cage. And of course, I'm talking about the LaLaurie Mansion. So, and Mark's going to bring you some facts about that. But first, you know, I've known about this house since I was a young kid. And the story I heard was that there's a house in the French Quarter that if you walk by on certain nights, at certain times, you can hear the screams of the slaves up in the attic.
Yes.
Well, you know, now the story as it's being told by most tour guides was that it was in 1834 that Madame LaLaurie is having this party at her house, and a fire breaks out. So all the people at the party run out into the streets, and the police and firemen are summoned. And they run to the residence, and knowing that there's slaves in the attic, they rush upstairs to the third floor, and here they find slaves who are victims of these grotesque medical experiments. Some are chained to the wall, some are held in small cages.
Their intestines are ripped out and tied around their bodies.
Right.
Bones are broken, placed in different parts of the body.
Right, so they take the slaves downstairs and lay them out in the street. And the people of the party are so appalled at what they see, they try to run back into the house to get Madame LaLaurie. But in the nick of time, she comes flying out of her mansion in her horse-drawn carriage and escapes through the crowd and is never seen from again. Problem is, the story isn't true.
That's not even close to what happened.
And tonight we're going to be bringing you the facts about what happened that night on April 10th, 1834. But first, Mark is going to be telling you how it all started.
Yeah, you know, this is a great show for your ride home and a great show to get ready to go see the Mardi Gras, because this show is about New Orleans. And when you think of the LaLaurie Mansion, you think of New Orleans. It's a lot of story that people put together at later times. Actually, the story David's talking about was written in 1946 by a lady named Jean de Laville. And it was called The Haunted House on Rue Royal. And she made up a lot of disgusting details about how the slaves were kept and all that, none of which was true.
It was actually embellished to sell copies of the book.
Yeah, she was writing a book about scary stories.
And
So
sadly, most researchers and tour guides today get their information from this book, and it's so wrong.
Well, they'll get their information from the 1889 book George Washington Cable wrote called Strange True Stories of Louisiana. And he had a house in there. He had a chapter in there called The Haunted House on Royal Street. He used two researchers. None of them ever named their sources. And this was written 64 years after the fire.
Right.
And a lot of that stuff was fake. Now, what they're going to tell you in those stories is that the reason she hated slaves was because her family was from Santo Domingo, where they had a slave revolt. And her family was killed in that slave revolt. That's why she hated slaves so much. It's not even close to being true. Her great-grandfather was called Daniel de Macarte, and he came over at the very beginning of the colony and became a very successful man. He came over early 1700s, still under French rule. He had a son named Louis Bartholomew Macarte, who took up a military career, and he was then eventually knighted as a chevalier. Now, that's going to be the parents of Marie Delphine Macarte, who will later become Madame LaLaurie. She was born, let me give you her date of birth here. Got it. I'll get to it in a second. No, that's the wrong date. I'll get to it. March 19th, 1787 is when she's married. Her mother is Marie Jean Larable. Now, they live it's going to be to the east in the plantation, to the east of Elysian Fields. That was all plantations. It was the McCarty plantation. That's what they earned. That's where they lived. The only truth to the rumor of somebody in her family being killed was her uncle by marriage. Jean-Baptiste Césaire Le Breton was murdered in 1771 by two of his slaves, Pemba and Merleton. They set the place on fire. When he came outside, they shot him. But this, again, is 16 years before Delphine was born. So, enough on her early life, but they're a prominent, wealthy New Orleans family. They own a plantation, slaves. Move up to 1800 when she is 14 years old. We're going to talk about her first marriage to Ramon Lopez y Anguelo de la Candelera.
At 14 years old.
He was 35.
And she was 14.
She was 14. He worked for the King of Spain. And the King of Spain sends him over here to be the intendant, which is second in charge of the governor. He doesn't want to come, but he goes anyway because the king has ordered him. On his journey over here in 1799, his wife dies. He arrives in New Orleans. He's all upset. So the McCartys are throwing a bunch of parties. He parties at their house. Somewhere along the line, he meets Marie Delphine McCarthy.
Who's 14 years old.
Who's 14 years old. She's 35. But that's really not that unusual. Understand, he's the second in charge of the Louisiana Territory. He's a pretty powerful man. They get married, but he makes two mistakes. The first mistake is you cannot get married to a local unless you have the permission of the king. He doesn't get the permission of the king. The second mistake that he makes is he reopens the slave trade with Africa against the concerns of the governor and the cabildo. So they're married a year to get, and when that happens, the king sends a letter for him to come back to Spain. He refuses to go back for like a year. He eventually ends up going back to Spain. He stays there for a while. He gets demoted to a low clerical job. They let him come back to Louisiana in 1805. He dies on a capsized ship while he's coming right off the coast of Havana. However, she does give birth to their first child, which is Marie Delphine Francisca Borja Lopez y Anguelo de Candelera. How would you like that name?
I'd like to spell that name.
Yes.
So, how old was she when she had this first child?
19.
19, okay.
She was about 19 years old when she had her first child. This will lead into the marriage of 18 and 19. They were married about 3 or 4 years. This leads to her second marriage when she marries Jean-Paul Blanc, who is originally from France. He's a slave trader. He's a merchant. He is a friend of Jean and Pierre Lafitte, which plays a big part here. And they get married March 19th, 1807 in St. Louis Cathedral by Pierre Antonio de Sadea.
Our buddy,
Pierre Antoine. So she actually knew Pierre Antoine.
And hangs out in Antoine's alley.
They give birth to 4 children. 1809, Louise Marie Pauline. 1813, Louise Marie Laurie. 1814, Louise Marie Jean. And 1815, Jean-Pierre Paulin. So you can see a similarity in their names. They're all kind of named the same. So they're all going to go by their third name, and this is going to play a part in this. At this time, she owns about 52 slaves. Her mother dies and leaves her part of the plantation, and then her father gives them a wedding gift. So they're owning 2 plantations along the river, right outside of New Orleans, downtown. They own about 52 slaves. They own a whole bunch of livestock. And because of his friendship with Pierre and Jean Lafitte, he actually brokers the deal for Jean Lafitte to assist the Americans in the Battle of New Orleans. And because of that deal, Pierre is let free. He escapes that night, which is pretty good. He dies October 7th, 1885, and when he dies, he pretty much leaves her broke. You ready? When we come back after the break, we're going to get into her third marriage, and the story's going to start.
And welcome back to Paranormal Talk with the New Orleans Ghost Hunters. You know, before we start our second segment, as I mentioned earlier, that Nicolas Cage once owned the house. This, I think, was back, early 2000? And the story behind that was he stayed one night in a house, and he experienced so much paranormal activity that he sold the house. It's not true. He actually did own the house, but he had to liquidate when he got into financial problems. And it was one of the houses, well, actually it was he had liquidated 2 houses in New Orleans, the LaLaurie Mansion, also a house he owned uptown, and several other houses he owned throughout the United States. So
He actually spent a lot of time there. It was more than one night.
yes, the story is that he spent one night and he experienced so much paranormal activity he had to get out the house and he sold it. So just more malarkey about the LaLaurie Mansion. But let's pick up where we started, where she marries her third husband,
Louis LaLaurie. Now, it's 1815. It's 10 months after the Battle of New Orleans. Her second husband dies. She's 29 years old, has buried 2 husbands, and has 5 children. He leaves her in death, but she's able to get away from his death by declaring that she's going to keep her own family's fortune. She's a fairly wealthy woman. Now, Leonard Louis Nicolas LaLaurie is born in Villeneuve-sur-Lot, France. He finishes medical school in 1824 and comes over to New Orleans kind of seeking his fame and fortune. He is an early orthopedic. I mean, before orthopedics like we have them today, he's one of the early guys. He tells people he can cure hunches, which is people basically with hunchbacks. It's believed that her daughter, Pauline, actually was suffering from hunchback. And in 1825, he writes letters home to his family in France saying that he's treating Madame Delphine McCarthy at that time, her daughter. She's 38. He is 24. So she's much older than him. Now, the family thinks she's just being a kindly older lady. They don't know that there's an affair going on.
Right, and back in those days, that was looked down upon.
Yes. In 1827, she gets pregnant with his child.
Out of wedlock.
Out of wedlock.
Also looked down upon.
Yes. She gives birth to their son, Jean-Louis Leonard LaLaurie. He splits town. Dr. LaLaurie splits town. He splits for a few months. He comes back. They get married. None of her family shows up at St. Louis Cathedral to witness the wedding because that's how much they look down on her. Now, you start getting a series of letters here from a man named Jean Bouze. He writes letters to his friend St. James in Paris, who happens to be a friend of, I want to call her Delphine, that was her name, of Madame LaLaurie, and tells him what's going on. In 1828, he starts writing letters to St. James saying, this marriage is bad. They're always fighting. They're always breaking up. They can't do anything together.
I heard he also spent a lot of time in Plaquemines.
He spent a lot of time in
And
Plaquemines.
it's rumored he might have had a mistress down there, too.
Well, in November 16th, 1832, she actually goes to the first judicial court and asks for separation. Says, hey, he treats me bad. He beats me. He spends a lot of time in Plaquemines in his medical practice. The only problem is you don't practice medicine in Plaquemines in 1832. He's just basically down there getting the heck away from her. He doesn't want to be around her, from what most people say. In 1833, he comes in and says, yeah, she can run my affairs here, but I'm pretty much in and out of Plaquemines. Now, reports of a cruelty. People say there's no reports of it. I'm going to give you facts that tell you that there are reports of it. Between 1816 and 1834, she owned 54 slaves. She was reported by her own family members to abuse her slaves. A lot of this comes from the letters that Jean Bouze writes home to France about her. Understand, he lives 1 block away from her on Royal Street. November 18th, 28, she sold slaves Celestine, Louise, Suzette, Edouard, Ben, and Juliette to her friend Rognier. He sells them to another friend who then sells them back to her. Well, under her care, Celestine, Louise, Edouard, Juliette all die. Why did this happen? Well, December the 1st, 1828, in a letter sent home by Bouze to France, he says she's finally been found guilty of, not guilty, but she's finally been charged with cruelty, that she beat some, she incarcerated some, and she starved them, and that justice has found her. That's what he writes home. In those days, if you mistreated your slaves, you could actually sell your slaves. One of the penalties was to sell your slaves. So it's believed that she knew that they were going to be taken from her. She sold them ahead of time. Family sends them back to her. By 1834, 5 of the 6 are dead. Okay? July 20th, 1829, he says she was found not guilty because no one saw her do it. But there was a lot of public outcry about her being found not guilty. In those days, all you had to do was go to court and say, no, I swear I never beat my slave, and that was it, because slaves were not allowed to testify against her. 1832 stated that she had been indicted by criminal court because of barbarous treatment to her slaves. She bought her way out of this one. Reports by Bose was that she was called to court in 1828, 1829, and 1832.
She spent a lot of time in court, huh?
Yes, and that after the fire, that he wrote home that she had killed her slaves without pity. Now, there is a report you're going to hear about her chasing a child up on the roof, and that the child falls off.
Right, that's a pretty famous story, that she was chasing this child slave on a roof, and the child fell into the courtyard and was killed, and now the child haunts the LaLaurie Mansion.
Now, during that time, it was, the first report of it is in 1836 by a woman named Harriet Martineau that comes down here and writes a book. But the child isn't mentioned. Only problem is the story at the vantage point that people say that they seen it happen, the vantage point didn't exist at that time. Now, in the 1946, John Devonier, the person I told, Jean de Lavigny, that wrote the book in 1946, she actually named the child Leah. There's no record that this person never existed. So there's just another inconsistency there. Now, what is kind of neat, St. Louis Cathedral Funeral Records reports the death of 20 of her slaves, 8 before her marriage to LaLaurie, and between 1831 and 1833, 12 slaves of hers died. Florence, 10 years of age; Celestine, 33 years of age; Edouard, 18 years of age; Leontine, 22 months. They all die in 31. They all died close to each other. In 32, Rose and Nicholas, 19 and 26 years of age. And then in 33, Boone, Marianne, Juliet, Jules, Marie, Sally. Well, I'm thinking they all died around the same time. So what I do is I pull up records of yellow fever, see if these were yellow fever deaths. Here's the problem. 1831, only 2 reported deaths of yellow fever.
So we can rule that out.
1832, 18 reports of yellow fever. And then 1833, 210. But that's nowhere near the reports of tens of thousands that died. Right. So why was her slaves dying in clusters between 1831 and 1833 while she was being charged with mistreatment? The fire. The fire occurs on the morning of April 10th, 1834, and it was covered by 3 local newspapers, the Bee, the Courier, and the Advertiser. You also have actual eyewitnesses to this, and one of them is Judge Jacques Francois Cornage, who happens to live right down the street. The fire breaks out. He goes to the house. He sees it's 10 o'clock in the morning, so it's not a party at night.
Right.
He goes to the house, and people are saying they're watching them bring the furniture out of the house, and people are coming up to him and they're going,
save the furniture.
Yeah.
Leave the slaves in the house.
Well, people are coming up to him and they're like, hey, Judge, they got slaves in the house. So he goes talk to LaLaurie, both of them together, and they go, nah, that's slander. That's slander. Okay, so he says, he pulls Mr. Dr. LaLaurie to the side. He asks him again. And his quote to him was, they would be those who were better employed if they would attend to their own affairs instead of officiously intermeddling with the concerns of other people.
In other words, stay out of my business.
Out of it. Well, he's not happy about that because he's the judge. And he actually tells people to break the doors down to go into the kitchen. Now, I'm going to give you his actual court deposition that was filed that day. But understand, all of this is public record now. What I'm about to tell you is public record about the fires. And it's really interesting and shows you the extent of actually what was going on in that house when they pulled the 7 slaves out.
Right, we're going to tell you exactly what the condition of the slaves.
Yes. And we will be back right after the break. If you want to give us a call, it's 504-556-9696. That's 504-556-9696.
All the
Welcome back to Paranormal Talk with the New Orleans Ghost Hunters. And tonight we'd like to thank Jiggers Bar and Grill for sponsoring our call-in phone lines. And also tonight we have a fill-in producer, Jeff. So Jeff, thank you for producing our show tonight. We can't do it without you. So before we went to the station break, Mark was starting to tell us a story. What happened on that night of April 10th, 1834, when the famous fire broke out at the LaLaurie Mansion?
It's actually daytime.
That's right.
It's actually morning.
Right, unless it was not a trying to think the right words. It was not a daytime party.
No, there was no party. If anything, she just got finished beating her slaves.
Right.
And she goes in, and we're going to go to Judge Canage, who actually gave a deposition on the day of the fire to Judge Galen Preval in his office. And I'm going to pick up here where pretty much Dr. LaLaurie told him to mind his own business when he said, do much better remaining at home rather than dictating to them the laws. Judge Canage then asked Monsieur Montreal and Fernandez to go to the service wing to make necessary search, stating that he had tried previously but was almost suffocated by the smoke. Felix, I cannot pronounce that last name, Mr. Felix, told him that he had broken the bars to one of the apartments and found some slaves. Judge Canage, Ducatel, Fernandez, Faustin, Gauschak, Gilliat, Lefebvre's, Montreal, and a few others found two negresses incarcerated, whom they liberated from the den. One was wearing an iron collar, very large and heavy, and was chained with heavy irons by the feet and walked with the greatest difficulty.
Well, you said something very interesting. You moved the bars on the apartment.
Yes.
Notice he said the apartment, not the attic.
That's right, because the house is not how it looks today.
Right. In 1834, the house was only 2 stories.
It was only 2 stories.
So it could not have had an attic, like the stories say.
No, and actually the fire started in the kitchen, and above the kitchen was the slave quarters, which everybody knew at that time she was using that as a prison.
Right, that's where the slaves were.
Monsieur Gilliat located the old negress lying on a bed under a mosquito bar. She had a deep wound to her head and appeared quite feeble. All were taken to the mayor's office. Judge Canage then walked to Judge Preval's chambers at the presbytery and gave sworn statement. Faust Ingerstock witnessed this and attested. So this is actually a court deposition given by a judge. So when you say this never happened, no, it happened.
It happened, but it wasn't a grotesque medical experiments. The slaves were actually mistreated. They were whipped. There was open sores. They were malnourished.
As a matter of fact, you got some good accounts of that. There were 7 slaves taken out, 4 females, 2 male, and 1 they don't know if it was male or female. They were taken to the Cabildo.
Right, they were taken out and laid in front of the Cabildo under the eaves.
Yes. 2,000 people came to visit them that day. Now,
I believe they were there waiting to be transferred to a local charity hospital.
Yes, but charity hospital has no records of them ever being treated.
Well, but that's what he put them there. They were waiting to transfer them to a charity hospital.
They might have, but
there's no record of them actually being transferred.
No, actually, no records of them ever being treated at charity hospital. However, in 1981, a piece of evidence comes out by, at the time, a man named Armand Saliard. He was the French consul to New Orleans. He wrote to the French Minister of Foreign Affairs. He actually wrote this on August the 20th, 1834, when he sent back home to France what was going on here. Stated that LaLaurie had tortured and starved her slaves. On the day of the fire, he walked to the Cabildo to see the slaves. I never saw a more horrible spectacle. The dislocated heads, the legs torn by the chains, the bodies streaked with blood from head to foot, with whiplashes and sharp instruments. She bound their hands and did not bandage their wounds. Flies had settled on their raw flesh, and when they were discovered, they were already devoured in maggots. There was no charge was brought forth that day, and people were outraged and stormed the house. This is the French Foreign Council of New Orleans writing this home to France.
Right. What actually happened was it wasn't the people outside the party that ran back to the house. It was the people who witnessed the condition of the slaves who actually kind of like gathered like a mob and went back to the LaLaurie Mansion to get Madame LaLaurie.
Well, exactly what happened is they form outside of her mansion. They're waiting for the police to come. The police does not come. Now, Martinet later on comes up with the story. We don't know how true it is that her coach driver, Beston, Bastian, however you say his name, comes up with the story. She's got to get away. So what he does is he goes, after dinner, you need to go for your normal carriage ride. I'll come up to the door, you get in. So right after dinner, he pulls up to the door. She gets in the carriage. The people are shocked to see her come out of the house. Then when they realize it's her, they storm the carriage. He drives the carriage into the crowd and then escapes down Bayou St. John to Lake Pontchartrain, where she takes a ship
To Mobile.
to Mandeville.
Mandeville. But then
She had
goes to
family in
Mobile.
Mandeville.
Okay.
She stayed in Mandeville like 2 to 3 weeks, went to Mobile, from Mobile to New York to his family's house, and then finally ended up in Paris. But
what's interesting is that the family, that the Crowley did ramshackle the house. They stole everything. They stole silverware. They stole pictures.
they took everything.
They completely destroyed the house. They gutted it.
Now, the house was completely destroyed. And Ambre Ducatel, who actually entered the house that day, he gave an eyewitness account that at that night at least 100 people went into the house and destroyed it. All the furniture was taken out. The house was pretty much burned. The only thing that was standing was the 4 walls.
And the house stood like that for quite a while.
For several years it's still like that. All the windows were broken out, so you can imagine a house with no windows in New Orleans over a period of 3 to 4 years.
Right.
It's going to get pretty nasty. The Courier Evening Edition on April the 10th stated that the fire started on the kitchen on the ground floor of the attached wing with the slave quarters above it, which many knew was an actual prison. April 11th, the Bee reported 7 slaves more or less horribly mutilated, suspended by the neck with their limbs stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. They had been confined for several months in this situation. The elderly negress had declared to the mayor, who was Dennis Prieur at that time, that it was she who had set the house afire with the intentions of terminating the sufferings of herself and her companions or perishing in the flames. Now, these are all, and I have more, but I mean, with the time we got, I have judges' statements, I have French consul statements, I have newspaper statements. Don't tell me nothing happened in that house.
Well, something did happen, but it wasn't what you were being told that it was a grotesque medical experience.
No, it wasn't grotesque medical experience.
It was just grotesque treatment of the slaves, the conditions they were in.
One of the things, and it comes out later through the work of Grace King in the 1900s, is her family was actually kind of, in the 1900s, we're in 2000s, in the 1900s, it was actually a move to kind of exonerate LaLaurie from it. And that was a lot of the work of Grace King and some other people, but Grace King kind of knew her family and had an agenda and never talked to anybody. And some of the reports that she got from another guy, she never included in her works. So there's always been this kind of stuff. Well, it never happened. And then it came up with this story in 1934. The Times-Picayune said it was her family that was lying about the whole thing. They only testified that the guy's name was Montreal. Well, we've been able to find out that the guy they were talking about was Bartholomew Montreal. His mother was LaLaurie's father's sister, and that he hated her because of she got some of the money. No money ever went to LaLaurie from that. And it said he was his neighbor. She wasn't his neighbor. The man lived on the corner of Decatur and Magazine Street. Not Magazine, Decatur and Mandeville. And he died 2 months after the fire.
Well, sure people out there want to hear about is the house really haunted or not. But this is really interesting that nothing really happened inside of the house for it to be haunted. Anything would be the building in the back. Now,
Right.
I have spoken to people who have actually been inside the house, and only one said when they went in there, they experienced some type of a strange electrifying feeling, like the hair on the arm stood up. But even the present owner, whose name I'm not going to mention, he has publicly said that he has never experienced anything in the house.
Stories come in. This is Ian. I'm glad you said that. Real quick, because we're running out of time. Around 1900s, the house is sold to an Italian man who does groceries. He starts charging people 10 cents to come in to prove that the house is not haunted. Then later on, when the house is turned into tenants, there's this Italian family who has these little boys that comes up with the way we're going to make money proving the house is haunted. So what they do is they dress up in sheets and run by the windows, have some other brothers drag chains through the attics, while the sister outside charges people a nickel to come in and see.
And that's why you have the story that you can hear the chains of the slaves in the attic.
Yeah, and that is a possibility. Like I said, I can't say that the house is haunted. I can't say that the house is not haunted. I can say there's no real evidence that the house is haunted. I can say that there's nothing in that house that ties it to what happened on April 34.
But if there's going to be any paranormal activity, it's going to be in, like I said, the apartment in the back.
It would be in the apartment in the back, which pretty much is not even there anymore. Nothing is there anymore except for walls.
And one thing we ask, if there any ghost hunting groups out there, please, honor the man's prophecy. He does not want ghost hunters going to his house and investigating.
Hey, until next week, bonne chance avec les fantômes.